Hello and welcome to the Insurgent Press podcast. My name is Liz and I'll be interviewing writers associated with the press about their work and how it came to be. This particular interview was recorded at Senate House on a cold Saturday afternoon in central London. This is where my conversation with Brian took place. Brian Kelly is the founder of Insurgent Press and the writer of the novel Murph. Described by the author as stoner sci-fi, Murph presents us with a world in which technology is increasingly out of our control. Facial recognition software has become the norm, and due to a virus, people's internet histories could be freely read. Fearing their darkest secrets will be revealed, customers swarm to Murph's joke shop in search of disguises. With this, Murph's isolated existence is burst open, and his privacy is lost when his assistant Alex becomes a famous musician. Can Murph, Alex, and the rest of the world come out of this experience unscathed? And what will they learn along the way? Let's go to that interview now. Brian, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Liz.
You described this book as stoner sci-fi. Can you explain to the listeners exactly what that means?
Well, I think sci-fi tends to have a broad sweep in terms of kind of what it's interested in. It's interested in big ideas, isn't it? It's interested in kind of themes and dystopia. And sometimes character can be kind of secondary to that. And for me, I'm more interested in people. I'm kind of more interested in kind of the emotions of what people are going through. So what I meant by stoner sci-fi is that, you know, my book is dealing with like big concepts, and it takes some of the tropes of kind of sci-fi, you know, technology and dystopian kind of things going outside of your control or whatever. But I'm not really interested in monsters or dystopia as I'm interested in human beings in very strange circumstances. And so my book has that stuff going along, but it's not really about that. It's about people. It's about Murph. It's about his friends. It's about them trying to navigate. They're very kind of relatable characters. I think they're very good people that we see all the time. And they're just ordinary people in really weird circumstances, and that's kind of what I'm interested in. That's what I mean, you know, when you start smoking weed when you're like 14, 15, what is it about? It's about like chatting with your mates, isn't it? And it's about kind of those deep conversations that are kind of meandering sometimes, silly sometimes, but it's about kind of empathy, and it's about kind of an interest in other people, and you know, so that's what I mean about the stoner fight. It's kind of like sci-fi without the edges. It's kind of like, it's a little bit soft, it's a bit nostalgic.
A little bit meandering.
A bit funny, you know, sometimes you're going to get the giggles, you're probably going to run off and eat a bag of Doritos, you know, that kind of thing.
Great, I mean, because there's a real sort of, almost a kind of rock and roll identity to the novel. But at the same time, it feels like you're calling on a vast array of life experiences. I know you're studying for a PhD at the moment. You reference a lot of artists, from writers like Joyce to musicians like Led Zeppelin. So who were your influences when you were writing this novel?
When I was writing the novel, the music thing, when I was growing up in Dublin, you know, it's very much two kind of camps, you know, it's kind of like the guys in school who are into football and stuff, and sports and getting drunk on the weekend, and then there's the weird kids in the corner who are smoking weed and listening to The Cure, and, you know, wearing, you know, jumpers that are like too big for you and stripy t-shirts and all of that kind of stuff of grunge, you know, and punk. And, you know, those were kind of badges of authenticity, you know, it's tribes, isn't it? And you know, that's how we kind of played out our identities when we were kind of figuring out who we were or whatever. So bands have always been very important to me as a kind of way to navigate my own identity in the world or whatever. But I also recognised that can be a type of snobbery, and so I took kind of Murph. He's kind of like, he's like a bastion of kind of, this is what's really rock and roll and this is what's not rock and roll. And, you know, it's this kind of exclusionary power that people can have from what they claim to be authentic or what's not, what's popular, what's proper art, what's not proper art, you know, these kind of categories which are made up, you know, these things can be a reverse snobbery on some kind of level. So I was interested in that as a thing, how people use rock and roll and cool. In some ways it can be a very liberating thing, because it's a way of finding your own voice in a world where maybe you don't identify with the larger culture of what's going on around you. But on the other hand, you have to be careful with it, because it can also become another type of exclusionary politics, I think. So that's where the band stuff and all that was coming from. Books I've always been into. I think if you're a writer and you're Irish, then you're going to have to navigate your way through the big greats that are kind of looming in the background. So I mean, and again, that whole Finnegan's Wake thing. Murph reads Finnegan's Wake, but he's only reading it because he wants to think he's better than everybody else, right? I don't think he even enjoys it, really. He's spending more time in the dictionary than he is in the book. And when I read Ulysses as a similarly posery early 20 something. I was kind of doing the same kind of thing. It was kind of two fingers up to everybody, isn't it? Look, I can do this.
I've been there.
And they did a bit of a pose, But it is a club as well. It's fun to be in, So I was using that as well. There's a bit of Beckett in there too with the recording of the tapes and stuff. So there's Studs Treacle is Murph's best friend who runs the hotel, but he also records everyone's voices who stays in the hotel, and he has this big vast kind of collection of tapes of everyone who stayed there, and that's all. So I'm riffing off that. And then there's that bit in the novel where he's trying to explain to Alex Murray why Murph is the way he is. He plays Alex Murray the tape, so I'm riffing off that as well, and that kind of like because I feel like culture's all around you, and it's people want to tell you what you can use and what you can't use, or what's kind of yours and what's not yours. But it's tools, and we can all take whatever we want from it and use it whatever way we feel. I've never felt like a passive user, that I have to be just the audience, or I have to be the reader, or I have to be and also that I'm the writer. I don't feel like I have to not be the critic, or I don't have, all these things are kind of interrelated, and I can play in the space between and use them to my advantage.
Definitely. Yeah, and you can see that. I mean, let's sort of stick with the music. I know you used to be a musician, and as you say, the role of music in Murph is quite evident. A lot of writers have a very strong relationship with music. Kazuo Ishiguro famously wanted to be a musician. Ian McEwan's latest novel, Lessons, explores the importance of music in a young boy's life. And so what do you think exactly makes this connection between music and literature so strong?
I think the thing about music that it's pre-language, it's coming from a place that's sound, and it's before we start attributing meaning to sounds. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's closer to emotion in a way that's not kind of like modelled by language. That kind of Wittgenstein stuff that language makes the world that you live. It's not actually like passive. It's not like something that just carries meaning. It's actually something that creates meaning. So I think, writers get a bit kind of, the words can never be the words, because it's always this thing. And I think like music feels like it's truer, to some kind of pre-language impulse. And then I think it gets wrapped up in a kind of mysticism as a result, because it's kind of, we don't think about the sounds of things in the way that we think about words, I think. And so we can tend to think about them as being somehow more pure, and it's just rhythms and tonality and da-da-da. And it is a kind of system of communication in and of itself. But because it's like pre-language, I think it's easier to mystify it as being kind of like the spirit or some kind of like godly thing, you know what I mean? We tend to think about music being the universal language, and I think that's the holy grail. It's what writers want, is this kind of like universal. I want to be able to like impart what I feel to you, and so I think writers can be drawn to music for that reason, because we kind of tell ourselves this story that rhythms and tonality and da-da is kind of like a pure communication, that can like transcend like any kind of cultural borders, or all the other things that keep us apart, race, sexuality, gender, whatever.
So let's go back to some of the themes that are present in Murph. It's ultimately a story of facial recognition software going beyond our control, and of internet histories being leaked. There's a real anxiety around computers, social media, and privacy more generally in the novel, particularly in light of recent developments around, the changing nature of social media, platforms like Twitter, ones which, to some degree remind us of our own powerlessness on the internet. Do you worry about our current relationship with technology?
I mean, I wouldn't be I'm not a Luddite. I'm not gonna like go out and start smashing the iPhone, let's all smash our iPads in the street kind of thing. I mean, I think, technology is our tools and we can use them whatever way we see fit. I mean, it is worrying that maybe we're not educated enough in how much data we're giving away, and maybe at the moment we're not all clued in to the possible outcomes of so vast amounts of data being in the hands of what seems to be a very few number of people who have a lot of power because they've got lots of money. And then the other issue is that they're kind of outside of democratic control. So you can see how that can go wrong quite easily, because what are our levers if things do go wrong to get rid of these people? I think that's a bit worrying. But I mean, I think we've always had anxieties about technology, haven't we? It's like, it was the bomb, it was the Industrial Revolution, it was,
Everyone went into joke shops, such disguises. That's the next one.
Yeah, true. Well, I guess that's the thing with Murph, right? It's like, here's this, insidious kind of technology thing that's kind of having a bad impact, but often it's farcical what actually happens. It's like, it's not always the end of the world and, everybody's starving in the streets type thing. Sometimes it's just kind of a farcical comedy. It's kind of like,
I mean, on that, because we've talked about the sort of serious themes, but as you say, I mean, it's quite a comic novel.
Yeah.
And there are these surreal, at times, kind of farcical moments. I mean, do you see life as you write it as being more of a comedy or a tragedy?
I think I think it's up to you, but I think if you're not laughing, there's not a lot else.
Right, fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm not. I don't.
But that in itself is quite a negative statement.
I don't know. Is it though?
Is that all we have?
I'm not sure it is negative. I think it's just kind of, there's light and there's dark. There's kind of. I'm not going for like everything's a duality kind of thing, but like there's so much contradiction. I don't feel like I want to pretend I know what's going on or like what the answers are or whatever. It all seems so very confusing. I think most people feel like that. Even people who are like, pretend to know the way are pretending to know the way. And often then they've put so much effort into kind of creating these, structures around themselves that they can uphold their positions. But a lot of the time, it is like Beckett's success, isn't it? There's nothing to do, and it's just kind of like, it's all a bit farcical, really, a lot of the time. So I don't know. I mean, that's not to say that like life isn't there. Like there are horrible things happening. It is, there's tragedies all the time. That's not to kind of say that it doesn't have real, proper impact on people. And a lot of things are very sad. But a lot of things are very funny too. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a kind of Irish thing of not taking yourself too seriously. Maybe that's just a kind of insecurity in myself that I feel like I have to perform jokey kind of thing. But I wouldn't enjoy. I don't know. It seems more real to me that sad things are funny. Because often there is humour, even in the darkest things.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting because in Murph, even the most farcical element of it, which is everyone wearing these disguises, they're using it as a mask for something else. So it does play into what you're saying, really. I guess so. Finally, what do you hope that your readers will take away from Murph?
Well, I hope they go on a bit of a journey with Murph. I mean, he's a curmudgeon and he's a pain in the ass, isn't he? Just how rude he is, especially at the start, it's kind of entertaining. And then, hopefully slowly you kind of get into his why he's like that. It's kind of his protection, in attempting to protect himself from the world. And then, I would like people to think about it. I don't like the swarming on the kind of public shaming stuff that goes on, or the kind of a lot of shouting and a lot of kind of, I don't know, very unkind behaviour. I recognise that, obviously the work of kind of holding people in power to account is very, very important, and also, analysing the privileges of particular people. And that is a process which is never going to end, and we rightly we should be holding people to account. But I think we also need to kind of remember, have a bit more empathy and kind of humanity in the way we conduct ourselves with each other. I mean, part of Club Verbal Discharge thing is to give people a voice to speak. Let's bounce off each other. And I think Murph's a bit about that as well. That kind of Murph's an asshole.
Yeah.
A lot of the people, the things that are in are asshole. But I've got loads of friends and people that I'm very, very interested in who have parts of them that I don't agree with. But I don't feel like that's like I can't be friends with you because there's something that I don't agree with. Because how boring would that be? That everybody holds my opinion about everything. I don't want that.
And it's good that you're not expected to like Murph necessarily, but you are committed to spending time with him.
Yeah.
In reading about him.
Yeah, and being interested in, why he is the way he is, or because like people are contradictions all the time. Like there's always things about people that make no sense, and they're the most interesting people, I think, actually.
Right, now we like to end our interviews at the Insurgent Press podcast with a quick fire round of either or questions.
Let me just stretch.
So some of these questions will be reminiscent of chapter 3 in Murph. Are you willing to take part? Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, well without further ado, let's begin. Poetry or prose?
False dichotomy.
Joke shop or music shop?
Ooh. For myself, music shop.
Joyce or Beckett?
Beckett.
Lennon?
It depends.
Oh.
The early stories are so good. I mean, The Dead's probably one of the best things ever written. God. Joyce.
You sure about that?
No.
Lennon or McCartney?
Oh, Lennon. Although I watched
that was a lot more confident.
You're giving me really hard questions. Although I watched the Disney, have you seen the Disney documentary?
The Peter Jackson one.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, Get Back.
I mean, I always, because I take the piss out of McCartney in Murph, actually, he gets a bit of a rough time. But actually, in that documentary, he comes across as just such a lovely guy. And he's just trying to keep his friends together. You can see he's just trying to like save the band.
Hard working.
Which is really hard, And actually, he was a lot more honest and kind of true to his friends than I thought his kind of public persona had portrayed in the past.
Loud or quiet?
Loud.
Modernism or realism?
Modernism.
Pessimism or optimism?
Optimism.
And finally, the past or the future?
Oh God. I mean, future never comes, the past never happened, right? It's kind of now.
Brian, thank you for joining me.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for joining me and listening to the Insurgent Press podcast. This interview was conducted and edited by me, Liz Lane, and my interviewee was Brian Kelly. Brian's novel Murph is available to buy on Amazon and the Insurgent Press website. Join me next time when I speak to another writer about their work and the ideas behind it. Until then.